For my Year 12 multimedia major work, I've created a 2-minute animated music video that allegorically represents the experience of loneliness, active imagination, and ego death. Throughout this project, I've developed skills in audio production, 3D and 2D animation, motion tracking, simulations, and compiling footage. After creating sheet music for the song using NoFlight, I created an Adobe Audition multi-track workspace with 5.1 audio channels and recorded each of the instrument's parts using the Yamaha Steinberg UR44 audio interface. Each of the electric guitar and keyboard tracks used a direct input to capture the sounds produced by the output of the instruments, whereas the acoustic guitar and drum tracks used various microphones to capture the natural sounds of the instruments. The multiband compressor and the parametric equalizer were used to create individual high-fidelity tones in each track that stand out in the mix. The studio reverb, analog delay, and echo were all used to create a broader tone in the tracks. The distortion, phaser, pitch shifter, and denoise were used sparsely to create unique tones and effects between featured instruments. Adobe Audition's guitar suite, as well as the VST plugin GK Amplification 2LE, were used as an AMSIM for the electric guitar tracks to add realism to the direct input. Keyframing the parameters of the effects allowed me to develop a wide variety of sounds within the song, such as a distorted guitar tone that drastically ascends and descends over a tritone whilst moving around the listener through the 5.1 audio channels, as well as an echoey guitar tone that crescendos in dynamics and feedback before suddenly dropping off. When recording the drum tracks, the phase between the microphones was kept in check by measuring the distance from the diaphragms of each microphone to the center of the snare drum, allowing for maximum constructive interference between sound waves. This concept was also kept in mind when recording the acoustic guitar tracks, as each microphone was placed the same distance from the guitar's porthole at different angles to allow for a broader scope of tonal qualities in the recordings. Organizing and learning each of the parts, accounting for each of the instrument's requirements when recording audio, as well as mixing and mastering the broad scope of sound proved to be a high degree of difficulty. Blender was used to produce 3D animations of the project, with similar techniques of modeling and texturing occurring between scenes. 3 distinct trees were modeled for the forest scenes using the same methodology of cutting, scaling, and extruding the UV maps and drawing over them in Adobe Photoshop. The leaves were added to the trees through assigning the area of the hair particle system over the tree's branches using weight paint mode. The rocks were created through adding a displace modifier to sphere meshes, and the scene was lit using various area, point, and spotlights to best replicate the natural lighting of a forest. The fast Carve add-on was used to create detail in the benches of the scene through creating gaps in the mesh in the place of other objects. A van was modeled from a cartoon image and duplicated for the scene. I applied a mirror modifier to a cube that was modeled into a van to make it symmetrical. Array and curve modifiers were utilized to create the chandelier in the restaurant scene, adjusting the radius of the circular path and the number of glass cylinders between layers. The fast Carve add-on was reused to create the detail in the chairs. A sphere mesh was added with an emission shader to provide the necessary lighting within the chandelier. Detail was added to the scene through various plates, bowls, cutlery, and skirting boards. The subdivision surface and wave modifiers were added to the ocean plane to create the natural waves of the ocean. Displace and array modifiers were added to the rocks to create natural bumps and to create paths along the outskirts of the road in the scene. A curve modifier was used to align the path of the rocks to a Bezier curve. Diffuse BDSF nodes were used in conjunction with freestyle and the grease pencil, with noise modifiers to create an organic 2D style animation that blends with the character design. Blender 2.93.0 Alpha was used to access the line art modifier in the grease pencil to achieve these outlines. Using the grease pencil significantly decreased the render times of the animations, as the only outlines calculated are the ones visible to the camera, decreasing the RAM usage and processing power whilst being able to access the GPU. Overall, the advanced lighting techniques, complex 3D models, and intricate aesthetic shading demonstrates a high degree of difficulty. Each of the shots in the project that features the protagonist was first filmed with a camera, with me acting as the protagonist. Tracking markers were set up around the environment to allow for motion capture within Blender, with at least 10 markers visible in each dynamic shot to allow for a clean motion track. Once the footage was prefetched and reloaded within the motion tracking workspace of Blender, I added in tracking markers manually before automatically calculating their paths. The movement of the bathroom door was tracked manually through creating individual rotation keyframes in the door that matched the footage. This process demonstrated a high degree of difficulty as it involved many hours of work and a high understanding of motion tracking to capture each shot and produce a clean movement in the camera. Once each shot was motion tracked in Blender, the footage was then rotoscoped in Adobe Animate to create organic movements in the character. Adobe Animate was used as it utilizes vector-based animation, which is infinitely scalable and produces cleaner, calculated lines. To create the purely organic animations of the project, onion skinning was used to ensure consistency in the animation. Symbols were created in the title sequence, as these animations simulations were repeated throughout the shot. Despite being a repetitive, simple task, rotoscoping demonstrates a high degree of difficulty as it is heavily time-consuming. 3D simulations of the portal tree were created in Blender using emission particle systems, adjusting the number, lifetime, velocity, physics settings, field weights, and the weight paint of the vertex group allowed me to create a satisfactory simulation of particles spurting out of a portal. A vortex force field was added to cause the particles to swirl around the portal. 2D simulations of the stars and flares in space were created through various effects in Adobe After Effects. The CC starburst effect was applied to 2 solid white backgrounds to create various star simulations, whereas the lens flare effect was applied to 2 black backgrounds to create various flare and nebula simulations. The tritone and hue saturation effects were used to adjust the color of the flares, with the turbulent displace effect distorting one of the flares to create a nebula. The complicated nature of creating 2D and 3D simulations demonstrates a high degree of difficulty. After all the footage was rendered as a lossless 4K PNG image sequence, the footage was imported and compiled into a single Adobe Premiere profile. Keyframes were added to the scaling, rotation, and opacity of various shots to create zooms, to fade shots to black, and to make the character appear as though he is floating in space. Once the shots were compiled sequentially, the footage was exported to Adobe Media Encoder, where it was rendered as an H.264 MP4 file, matching the source's specifications at a high bitrate. This project demonstrates a wide variety of advanced production techniques that have been used to create a high-quality animated music video.